Could one weathered Texas rancher really outsmart a billion-dollar cartel operation? What happens when desperation meets military precision and survival instinct collides with calculated risk? This isn't just a story about stolen money. It's about how far one man will go when everything he's built is about to disappear forever. Before I break down how it unfolded, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. The morning sun crested over the barren hills of Val Verde County, Texas, casting long shadows across what had once been prime grazing land. Garrett Blackwood stood on the wraparound porch of his family's ranch house, surveying 4,800 acres of drought-scorched earth that stretched toward the Mexican border, 12 miles south. The land had been in his family since 1936, passed down from his grandfather who had built the ranch during the Great Depression with nothing but determination and borrowed money. Now in September 2023, that same borrowed money was about to cost Garrett everything. At 47, Garrett possessed the lean, weathered build of a man who had spent his entire adult life working with his hands. His face bore the permanent squint lines of someone who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger between 2007 and 2012, followed by 11 years of managing the family ranch. His hands, scarred from barbed wire and machinery, moved with the economical precision of someone who had learned that wasted motion could mean the difference between life and death. The divorce papers had been finalized in 2019, ending a 15-year marriage that had gradually eroded under the weight of financial pressure, conflicting schedules, and what his ex-wife Diane had called his emotional unavailability. The truth was more complex. Afghanistan had taught Garrett that survival required emotional distance, constant vigilance, and the ability to make life or death decisions without hesitation. These traits had made him an excellent soldier and a competent rancher, but a challenging husband and father. His 17-year-old son Tyler was scheduled to start at University of Colorado in January, assuming Garrett could somehow produce the $15,000 required for the first semester's tuition and expenses. The boy had inherited his father's intelligence and work ethic, earning academic scholarships that covered most of the costs. But the remaining balance might as well have been $15 million, given Garrett's current financial situation. The numbers were brutal and unforgiving. 3 consecutive years of severe drought from 2020 to 2023 had reduced his cattle herd from 800 head to fewer than 200. The surviving animals were gaunt shadows of their former selves, barely worth the cost of feed and veterinary care. His monthly expenses totaled $12,000. Loan payments, property taxes, utilities, insurance, and the minimal costs required to keep the ranch operational. His current income from cattle sales and the small government subsidies available to drought-stricken ranchers brought in approximately $3,200 monthly. The mathematics of inevitable foreclosure were inescapable. The final blow had come in March of 2022, when Garrett's father succumbed to pancreatic cancer after a 14-month battle that had consumed the family's savings and left behind medical bills totaling $180,000. Harold Blackwood had been a proud man who had refused to burden his son with the full extent of the ranch's financial problems. Only after the funeral had Garrett discovered the true scope of the debt his father had accumulated, trying to keep the operation afloat through previous droughts, market downturns, and the gradual consolidation of the cattle industry that had destroyed most family ranches in South Texas. Garrett owed $340,000 to various creditors: the bank that held the ranch mortgage, equipment financing companies, feed suppliers, veterinary services, and the hospital where his father had received treatment. The bank had been patient, extending payment deadlines and restructuring loans, but their patience was exhausted. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 60 days unless Garrett could produce a substantial payment or demonstrate a realistic plan for meeting his obligations. He had explored every conventional option. Additional loans required collateral he didn't possess and income projections he couldn't justify. Selling portions of the ranch would provide temporary relief but would reduce the property's grazing capacity below the threshold needed for profitable cattle operations. Taking a job in town would provide steady income but would require abandoning the ranch entirely, triggering immediate foreclosure and ensuring that 4 generations of family history would end with his failure. As Garrett walked the fence line separating his property From the vast emptiness that stretched toward the Rio Grande, he noticed something that had been occurring with increasing frequency over the past several months: tire tracks in the dirt. Not the wide knob tracks of ranch vehicles or the narrow impressions left by Border Patrol units, but the distinctive tread patterns of expensive SUVs and luxury sedans that had no legitimate reason to be crossing his remote property. The tracks always appeared in the same general area, near an abandoned oil derrick that had been drilled by his grandfather in the 1940s during a brief and unsuccessful attempt to diversify the ranch's income sources. The derrick had been inactive for decades, its rusted steel framework serving as a landmark visible from miles away across the flat terrain. Garrett had always assumed it was worthless, except as a roosting site for buzzards and an occasional shelter for cattle during severe weather. But someone else seemed to find the location interesting. Garrett's military training in surveillance and reconnaissance had taught him to observe patterns, identify anomalies, and investigate potential threats to his area of operations. Over the following weeks, he began paying closer attention to the activity around the old derrick. The tire tracks appeared every few weeks, always overnight, always following the same route from the border toward the north. Sometimes he found evidence of brief stops: cigarette butts, water bottles, occasionally small pieces of packaging or equipment that suggested people had remained in the area for extended periods. The breakthrough in his understanding came on a clear Tuesday night in early August when helicopter activity over his ranch woke him from sleep. Garrett stepped onto his porch and watched as an aircraft with no visible markings circled the oil derrick area several times before continuing north toward Interstate 90. The helicopter flew low, without navigation lights, using flight patterns that suggested the pilot was intimately familiar with the terrain and the location of obstacles like power lines and radio towers. The next morning, Garrett found fresh tire tracks around the derrick, along with evidence that several people had spent considerable time at the location. Boot prints indicated at least 4 individuals, all wearing military-style tactical boots. They had cleared brush from around the derrick's base, revealing a small concrete foundation that Garrett had never noticed before. Most significantly, they had left behind a small piece of waterproof tape bearing Spanish text that Garrett recognized from his military service as instructions for handling sensitive materials. Garrett Blackwood was witnessing a smuggling operation that used his property as a way station. His first instinct was to contact Border Patrol and report the illegal activity. As a military veteran with a security clearance and a clean criminal record, Garrett had always maintained cordial relationships with federal law enforcement agencies operating in the border region. Reporting the smuggling would be the responsible, legal, and morally correct response to discovering criminal activity on his property. But responsible, legal, and morally correct actions wouldn't save his ranch or pay for his son's education. Instead, Garrett decided to conduct surveillance. His military training included extensive instruction in reconnaissance techniques, surveillance methodology, and intelligence gathering procedures developed through decades of conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq. Garrett understood how to observe targets without being detected, how to document activities without interfering with operations, and how to analyze patterns that revealed the structure and schedule of complex organizations. He began by installing motion-activated trail cameras in concealed locations around the oil derrick, using equipment designed for monitoring wildlife, but perfectly suited for documenting human activity. The cameras were camouflaged, weatherproof, and capable of operating for weeks without maintenance. More importantly, they recorded high-resolution video with timestamps that would allow Garrett to establish precise schedules and identify individuals involved in whatever operation was using his property. The results exceeded his expectations. The cameras revealed that his property was being used as a temporary storage and transfer point for what appeared to be a sophisticated smuggling network. Every 21 days, vehicles arrived at the derrick site between 1:30 and 2 a.m., following routes that avoided Border Patrol checkpoints and surveillance systems. The vehicles were expensive SUVs and pickup trucks with Mexican license plates, operated by men who moved with the discipline and coordination of professional security personnel. But they weren't smuggling drugs, they were smuggling money. The operation followed predictable patterns that Garrett documented with military precision. The vehicles would arrive carrying metal cases that required 2 men to lift, suggesting contents weighing between 40 and 60 pounds each. The cases were stored inside the Derrick's concrete foundation, which had been modified to create a hidden compartment accessible only through a concealed entrance that blended seamlessly with the surrounding structure. The money remained at the Derrick for exactly 11 hours before a second group arrived to retrieve it. The pickup crew drove vehicles with Texas plates and appeared to be American citizens based on their clothing, equipment, and behavior patterns. They handled the cases with extreme care, loading them into specially modified trucks equipped with hidden compartments designed to defeat casual inspection by law enforcement. Garrett estimated that each case contained approximately $500,000 in mixed denominations, based on the weight, size, and the careful handling procedures used by both delivery and pickup crews. With 16 cases per shipment arriving every 21 days, the smuggling operation was moving approximately $8 million in cash through his property monthly. The money was drug profits being laundered through legitimate American businesses, transported from collection points in Houston to processing facilities in Laredo, before disappearing into the complex financial networks that connected Mexican cartels to American money laundering organizations. The system was elegant, efficient, and virtually undetectable by conventional law enforcement methods because it exploited the vast, empty landscapes of South Texas, where surveillance was limited and federal agents were vastly outnumbered by the criminal organizations they were attempting to monitor. Garrett Blackwood was witnessing the movement of nearly $100 million annually, conducted by people who would kill him without hesitation if they discovered his surveillance activities. But $8 million would solve every financial problem he had ever faced. Garrett had found the solution to all his problems sitting in a rusted oil derrick on his own land. But taking cartel money wasn't like robbing a bank. Cartels didn't call the police when they were robbed. They called men with shovels and blowtorches. The planning phase consumed 6 weeks of meticulous preparation that demonstrated the same attention to detail Garrett had brought to military operations in one of the world's most dangerous combat environments. Unlike the impulsive criminals featured in movies and television shows, Garrett approached the theft with the patience and systematic thinking that had kept him alive through 2 combat deployments and 15 years of managing complex ranching operations under extreme financial pressure. The first challenge was timing. The surveillance cameras had established that money shipments arrived every 21 days, always on Tuesday nights, always following identical procedures. The cases were stored at the Derrick site for exactly 11 hours, providing a window of opportunity between 2 a.m. when the delivery crew departed and 1 p.m. when the pickup crew arrived the following day. But optimal timing required more than simply knowing when the money would be present. Garrett needed to ensure that his activities wouldn't be detected by Border Patrol aircraft, local law enforcement patrols, or the sophisticated surveillance systems that the smuggling organization might have deployed to protect their operation. Through careful observation, he had identified a 4-hour window between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. when air traffic was minimal, patrol vehicles were focused on other sectors, and the smuggling organization relied on passive security measures rather than active monitoring. The second challenge was logistics. Moving 16 cases weighing 40 pounds each required specialized equipment and a credible cover story that would withstand scrutiny from anyone who might witness unusual activity around his ranch. Garrett solved this problem by modifying his Ford F-250 pickup truck to accommodate the weight and volume of the stolen cases while maintaining the appearance of routine ranching equipment. He installed a custom-built storage compartment in the truck bed, designed to hold the money cases in a configuration that would pass casual inspection as ranch supplies or equipment. The compartment was concealed beneath a false floor and surrounded by legitimate ranching materials, feed sacks, veterinary supplies, tools, and spare parts that justified the truck's weight and explained any unusual sounds or movements during transport. The most critical element of his plan was developing a replacement strategy that would delay discovery of the theft for as long as possible. Garrett understood that his survival depended on maximizing the time between when he stole the money and when the theft was discovered. Every additional hour of delay increased his chances of successful escape and decreased the likelihood that investigators could trace the crime to his ranch or establish his involvement. Garrett's solution was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of simply stealing the cases, he would replace them with identical containers filled with materials that matched the weight and external appearance of the original cases, but contained worthless contents. The substitution would fool casual inspection by the pickup crew, who would load the decoy cases into their vehicles and transport them to the processing facility. The theft wouldn't be discovered until the cases were opened at their final destination, potentially days after Garrett had disappeared with the real money. Creating 16 convincing decoy cases required weeks of preparation and several $1,000s in materials that Garrett could barely afford. He purchased metal cases identical to those used by the smuggling organization, matching the brand, size, and external features through careful observation of his surveillance footage. He filled the cases with sand and scrap metal to match the weight distribution of currency bundles, then sealed them using techniques that would fool casual inspection but wouldn't survive detailed examination. The most challenging aspect was matching the external markings and security features that the smuggling organization used to identify their cases and prevent tampering. Garrett's cameras had captured detailed images of serial numbers, inspection tags, and security seals that he reproduced with painstaking accuracy using materials purchased from multiple sources across South Texas. Garrett also prepared his escape route with military precision. He arranged to purchase a used Toyota Camry through a private sale, paying cash and avoiding dealership documentation that might create traceable records. He registered the vehicle under a false identity created through identity theft techniques he had learned about through research rather than personal experience, using information from a deceased military veteran whose personal details were available through public records but whose death wasn't widely documented in commercial databases. His escape plan involved multiple phases designed to confuse pursuit and prevent investigators from tracking his movements. He would drive the Camry to a storage facility in San Antonio, transfer the money to a rental vehicle obtained through different false documentation, then continue to Colorado, where he had identified a remote cabin available for long-term rental through cash payments that wouldn't require extensive background checks or credit verification. Most importantly, Garrett prepared for the psychological challenges of committing a crime that would make him a permanent fugitive from both federal law enforcement and one of the most violent criminal organizations in North America. He understood that success required absolute commitment to his chosen course of action. There would be no opportunity to change his mind, return the money, or seek forgiveness from the people he was about to rob. On September 15, 2023, Garrett Blackwood made his final preparations for what would either save his family's legacy or result in his death. The night was clear and moonless, with temperatures dropping into the 60s as autumn approached the South Texas borderland. Garrett had spent the day maintaining his normal routine, checking cattle, repairing equipment, and handling the mundane tasks that define ranch life. To any observer, including the surveillance systems that might be monitoring his activities, he appeared to be simply another struggling rancher, dealing with the endless challenges of keeping a failing operation functional for another day. At 10 p.m., Garrett made his final preparations. He loaded his modified pickup truck with the 16 decoy cases, arranging them in the concealed storage compartment he had built specifically for this operation. He dressed in dark clothing suitable for night movement across rough terrain, including tactical boots left over from his military service, and a lightweight jacket that would provide concealment without restricting his mobility. Most importantly, he activated the specialized equipment he had acquired through military surplus dealers and online sources that didn't conduct detailed background checks. Night vision goggles would allow him to navigate in complete darkness without using artificial light that might be detected by surveillance systems. A military-grade radio scanner would monitor local law enforcement and Border Patrol communications, providing advance warning of any unusual activity that might threaten his operation. At 1:15 a.m., Garrett positioned himself 400 yards from the oil derrick, using a hunting blind he had constructed weeks earlier to provide concealed observation of the smuggling operation. The blind was camouflaged to blend with the surrounding brush and positioned to provide clear sightlines while minimizing his exposure to detection by the smuggling crews or their security measures. The delivery vehicles arrived precisely on schedule at 1:33 a.m. Two SUVs approached the derrick using routes that avoided the main ranch roads, following paths that had been worn smooth by repeated use over months of operation. The vehicles were expensive late-model Mercedes and BMW SUVs with Mexican plates, operated by 4 men who moved with the professional coordination of trained security personnel. But something was different about this delivery. Instead of the usual quick unloading procedure that Garrett had observed in previous operations, the delivery crew appeared to be conducting extended security checks around the Derrick site. They spent nearly 20 minutes examining the area for signs of disturbance, using handheld devices that might have been metal detectors or electronic surveillance equipment. One man climbed the Derrick structure to conduct visual reconnaissance of the surrounding terrain, while another examined the ground around the concealed storage compartment with what appeared to be a flashlight equipped with a specialized filter that would reveal footprints or other evidence of unauthorized activity. Garrett realized that the smuggling organization had detected some sign of his surveillance activities and had increased their security procedures accordingly. The extended security checks suggested that they suspected potential interference with their operation, but hadn't yet identified the specific threat or its source. The delivery crew finally began unloading the money cases at 2:07 a.m., 34 minutes behind their usual schedule. They moved with heightened alertness, frequently stopping to scan the surrounding area for signs of observation or potential threats. 2 men remained posted as security while the other 2 handled the cases, maintaining constant communication through radio headsets that suggested sophisticated coordination with personnel who weren't visible at the site. Garrett watched through his night vision equipment as 16 cases were unloaded and stored in the concealed compartment within the Derrick's foundation. Each case appeared identical to those he had observed in previous deliveries, confirming that his decoy cases should pass initial inspection by the pickup crew scheduled to arrive later that morning. The delivery crew completed their work at 2:41 a.m. and began their departure procedures. But instead of leaving immediately as they had in previous operations, they conducted a final security sweep that brought one of the men within 50 yards of Garrett's concealed position. The man moved slowly, examining the ground for tracks and using what appeared to be night vision equipment to scan for heat signatures or movement in the surrounding brush. For nearly 5 minutes, Garrett remained motionless in his hunting blind while the security sweep passed within yards of his location. His military training included extensive instruction in evading detection by enemy forces, and he applied those techniques to avoid discovery by criminals who would certainly kill him if they realized they were being observed. He controlled his breathing, minimized his heat signature, and relied on the camouflage and positioning he had planned specifically for this scenario. The security sweep passed without detecting Garrett's presence, and the delivery vehicles departed at 2:58 a.m., leaving the money unguarded except for whatever passive security measures the organization might have deployed around the site. Garrett waited an additional 30 minutes to ensure that the delivery crew had genuinely departed and wasn't conducting extended surveillance from concealed positions. At 3:30 a.m., he began his approach to the oil derrick, moving through terrain he had walked thousands of times during his years of ranch management, but now crossing for the most dangerous purpose of his life. His route avoided open ground, where he might be visible to surveillance cameras or motion detectors, following fence lines and drainage ditches that provided concealment while allowing rapid movement toward his objective. He carried the 16 decoy cases using a military surplus backpack and a wheeled cart designed for transporting hunting equipment across rough terrain. The combined weight exceeded 100 pounds, but Garrett's years of military service in physical ranch work had maintained his strength and endurance at levels that made the load manageable across the half-mile distance to the derrick. But reaching the derrick required overcoming an obstacle Garrett hadn't anticipated during his planning. The delivery crew had left 2 guards posted in concealed positions around the site, breaking their established pattern of departing immediately after unloading the money cases. The guards were positioned to observe the approaches to the derrick while remaining hidden from casual observation, suggesting that the organization's security concerns had escalated beyond his expectations. Garrett adapted his approach using tactics developed during counterinsurgency operations in Afghanistan, where enemy forces routinely modified their procedures to counter American military capabilities. He created a distraction by activating motion sensor lights at his ranch house, located 1 mile from the derrick, using a remote control system he had installed months earlier as a security measure for his property. The sudden illumination drew both guards away from their positions as they investigated what appeared to be potential security breach at the ranch headquarters. Their departure created a 15-minute window of opportunity during which the Derrick site remained unguarded and accessible for Garrett's operation. Working with practiced efficiency developed through years of handling heavy ranch equipment, Garrett accessed the concealed storage compartment and began substituting his decoy cases for the money-filled originals. The compartment was larger than his surveillance had suggested, extending several feet underground with professional waterproofing and climate control systems that indicated sophisticated construction by experienced professionals. The money cases were heavier than his estimates had suggested, probably containing closer to $600,000 each, rather than the $500,000 he had calculated. The total weight approached 950 pounds, requiring multiple trips between the storage compartment and his transport cart, and leaving Garrett exhausted from the physical effort combined with the mental stress of handling nearly $10 million in stolen drug money. Each case was secured with multiple locks and sealed with security tape that would reveal tampering. But Garrett focused on speed rather than examination of contents. His priority was completing the substitution before the guards returned from investigating the distraction at his ranch house. The substitution process consumed 18 minutes, slightly longer than Garrett had planned, but still within acceptable parameters for avoiding detection. As he completed loading the final money case into his transport cart, he could see flashlight beams in the distance moving back toward the Derrick site as the guards concluded their investigation of the ranch house lighting. Garrett retreated using a different route that avoided the guards' return path, following drainage ditches and fence lines that provided concealment while allowing rapid movement toward his concealed vehicle. The weight of the money cases slowed his progress significantly, but his military training had prepared him for operations requiring movement of heavy equipment across hostile terrain under extreme time pressure. At 4:23 a.m., Garrett Blackwood drove away from his family's ranch carrying approximately $9.6 million in drug money, fully aware that he had just committed the crime that would define the rest of his life. As Garrett's truck disappeared into the Texas night with nearly $10 million in cartel money, he had no idea that the Sinaloa organization had lost more than cash. They had lost face. And in cartel culture, that was a death sentence that could only be paid in blood. His escape route had been planned with the same attention to detail that characterized every aspect of the operation. Instead of using main highways where he might encounter routine law enforcement patrols or border security checkpoints, Garrett followed back roads and ranch paths that connected his property to a network of rural routes extending throughout South Texas. His destination was a storage facility in San Antonio, where he would transfer the money to different vehicles and begin the next phase of his disappearance. The drive consumed 4 hours of careful navigation through terrain that Garrett knew intimately from years of ranch operations and military training exercises conducted in similar environments. He encountered no law enforcement personnel, no suspicious aircraft activity, and no evidence that his theft had been discovered by the smuggling organization or reported to federal authorities. At 8:47 a.m., Garrett reached the storage facility and began transferring the money cases to a rental van he had obtained using false identification. The transfer process required 43 minutes and represented the most vulnerable phase of his escape plan when he was exposed to observation in a semi-public location while handling obviously valuable cargo that would be impossible to explain if questioned by law enforcement. But the early morning timing provided natural concealment as the storage facility was nearly empty except for a few customers retrieving recreational vehicles or construction equipment for weekend activities. Garrett's purposeful demeanor and legitimate-appearing equipment rendered him effectively invisible to the few people present. Just another working man handling business that didn't concern anyone else. By 10 a.m., Garrett was driving north on Interstate 35 in a nondescript rental van carrying enough stolen money to make him one of the most wanted fugitives in America. His pickup truck had been abandoned in the storage facility, thoroughly cleaned of fingerprints and DNA evidence, with its registration and insurance information, leading to dead ends that would confuse investigators for weeks. The pickup crew arrived at the oil derrick at 12:30 p.m., 90 minutes ahead of their usual schedule, suggesting that the delivery crew had reported their security concerns and the organization had decided to expedite the money transfer. The pickup proceeded normally, with the crew loading the 16 decoy cases into their modified vehicles without conducting detailed inspections that would have revealed the substitution. By 2:15 p.m., the decoy cases were loaded into trucks bound for Laredo, and the complex of money laundering operations that would process what they believed were drug profits ready for integration into legitimate financial systems. The theft wouldn't be discovered until the cases reached their final destination and were opened for processing, probably sometime the following day. Garrett Blackwood had successfully executed one of the most audacious thefts in American criminal history, and he had purchased at least 24 hours of lead time before anyone realized that nearly $10 million had disappeared from one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in North America. But the real challenge was just beginning. The discovery came 37 hours after Garrett had driven away with the money, when processing personnel at a money laundering facility in Laredo opened the first decoy case and found sand instead of currency. The reaction was immediate and devastating for everyone connected to the operation. Within minutes of the discovery, the smuggling organization implemented crisis protocols developed through decades of operating in an environment where theft, betrayal, and law enforcement interdiction represented constant threats to their billion-dollar enterprise. Every person who had handled the shipment was immediately placed under armed guard pending investigation. Communication systems were shut down and replaced with new equipment to prevent law enforcement agencies from monitoring their response. Most ominously, elimination orders were issued for the 4-man delivery crew and the 3-man pickup crew, all of whom were considered potential security risks regardless of their actual involvement in the theft. The investigation began with systematic torture of the 7 crew members, conducted by specialists flown in from Guadalajara who possessed extensive experience in extracting information from people who might prefer death to betrayal of criminal organizations. The interrogations revealed that none of the crew members had participated in or possessed knowledge of the theft, but this conclusion was reached only after all 7 men had been killed through procedures designed to ensure they weren't concealing information about accomplices or alternative explanations for the missing money. The cartel's investigation then expanded to examine every aspect of the transportation route, focusing on the temporary storage location where the theft had occurred. A team of 12 investigators, including former military personnel and experienced trackers, was dispatched to conduct detailed analysis of Garrett's ranch in the surrounding area. The investigation team discovered evidence of surveillance activities around the oil derrick, including concealed camera positions and observation points that revealed systematic monitoring of the smuggling operation over an extended period. Footprints, tire tracks, and equipment traces indicated that a single individual had conducted professional-level reconnaissance for weeks before executing the theft with military precision. Most significantly, the investigators found traces of materials used in constructing the decoy cases, including adhesive residues, metal filings, and packaging fragments that suggested the theft had been planned and executed by someone with access to specialized equipment and detailed knowledge of the smuggling operations procedures. But the identity of the thief remained unknown. The cartel's response included posting a $5 million bounty for information leading to the recovery of their money and the capture of the person responsible for the theft. The bounty was communicated through networks that reached every criminal organization, law enforcement informant, and professional tracker operating throughout North America, creating one of the largest manhunts in the history of organized crime. Simultaneously, federal law enforcement agencies became aware of the theft through intelligence intercepts that monitored cartel communications and financial networks. The FBI opened a formal investigation led by Agent Rebecca Lawson, a 15-year veteran of financial crimes investigations who specialized in money laundering operations conducted by international criminal organizations. Agent Lawson's investigation faced immediate challenges that reflected the unique nature of crimes involving organizations that couldn't report their losses to legitimate authorities. The cartel couldn't file formal complaints or provide detailed information about their stolen property without admitting to criminal activities that would trigger federal prosecutions. The FBI had to reconstruct the details of the theft through surveillance data, informant reports, and intelligence gathered from monitoring criminal communications. The federal investigation initially focused on identifying the temporary storage location where the theft had occurred, using cartel communications intercepts and surveillance footage from Border Patrol aircraft to establish that criminal activity had been centered around a specific area of Valverde County. Ground reconnaissance teams confirmed that an oil derrick on private ranch land had been used as a way station for smuggling operations and that the theft had occurred at this location during a routine money transfer. Property records identified Garrett Blackwood as the owner of the ranch where the theft had occurred, immediately placing him at the center of both the cartel and federal investigations. Background checks revealed his military service, financial problems, and personal circumstances that provided clear motivation for involvement in criminal activities. His sudden disappearance from the ranch, coinciding exactly with the timing of the theft, eliminated any possibility that his involvement was coincidental. But identifying Garrett as the primary suspect was easier than locating him for arrest or interrogation. While federal agents followed paper trails and witness statements, the cartel used methods that left no paper trail at all. Bodies were disappearing across South Texas, and El Cazador was getting closer to the truth with every interrogation. Garrett's escape plan had anticipated intensive pursuit by both criminal and law enforcement organizations, and he had prepared accordingly. By the time investigators identified him as their primary suspect, he had already implemented identity changes, vehicle substitutions, and location transfers that rendered him effectively invisible to conventional tracking methods. His route from Texas to Colorado had avoided electronic payment systems, security cameras, and routine law enforcement checkpoints that might have created traceable records of his movements. He traveled during off-peak hours, used vehicles registered under false identities, and avoided accommodation facilities that required identification or credit card information. Most importantly, he had researched and prepared multiple backup plans that would allow him to change his route, identity, or destination if pursuit became too intense. The cabin in Colorado had been selected specifically for its isolation and the minimal documentation required for rental agreements. Located 40 miles from the nearest town and accessible only through private roads that weren't monitored by law enforcement agencies, the location provided perfect concealment for someone who needed to remain invisible while planning his next moves. Garrett's military training included extensive instruction in escape and evasion techniques, developed through decades of conflict in environments where capture meant death. He applied those techniques to create multiple layers of deception that would confuse both criminal and law enforcement pursuit efforts, while providing him with options for further flight if his initial hideout was discovered. But even the most sophisticated escape plan couldn't provide permanent security against the resources that were being mobilized to find him. The federal investigation intensified throughout October and November 2023 as Agent Lawson's team systematically eliminated alternative suspects and focused their efforts on locating Garrett Blackwood. FBI resources included financial investigators who analyzed banking records and credit reports, technical specialists who examined electronic communications and internet activity, and field agents who conducted interviews throughout the communities where Garrett might seek refuge. The investigation identified 23 potential suspects within a 50-mile radius of the theft location, all of whom were military veterans with financial problems and the technical skills needed to execute sophisticated criminal operations. Background investigations eliminated 15 of these suspects through alibi verification, financial analysis, and behavioral assessment that demonstrated their lack of involvement in criminal activities. 8 suspects remained under active investigation by December 2023, but Garrett's profile distinguished him from the others through the combination of his military expertise, intimate knowledge of the ranch where the theft occurred, and the timing of his disappearance. Agent Lawson obtained federal warrants for his arrest on charges of theft, money laundering, and violation of numerous federal statutes related to interfering with criminal investigations. But warrants were meaningless without the ability to serve them.